I was at a dinner party recently, the kind where everyone usually politely agrees on everything. The host, a guy I've known for years as a relaxed, secular professional, suddenly brought up a minor celebrity who had tweeted something problematic nearly a decade ago. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. His eyes didn't just narrow, they glazed over with a specific kind of cold, inquisitorial intensity. He spent the next 10 minutes dissecting the stranger's moral failings with the precision of a surgeon, demanding not just an apology, but total career destruction. It wasn't a political critique, it felt like he was hunting a witch. What struck me wasn't his anger, but his absolute lack of what Europeans might call a tragic buffer. When a guest from overseas tried to intervene, shrugging and suggesting that humans are naturally flawed and life is just messy, the host looked at him as if he were speaking an alien language. To the host, there was no room for mistake, only a sin that required immediate purging. That look of terrified rigidity, where a minor flaw is treated as a sign of absolute damnation, made me realize something profound about the current American nervous breakdown. We keep saying America has become a godless, secular society, but watching him tremble with that righteous indignation, I realized we've got it backwards. We haven't lost our religion, we've just mutated it into something far more unforgiving.
That is a really profound observation. It's insightful because it goes right to the heart of this human need for structure.
Yeah.
These rigid moral boundaries, especially when we're struggling with the messiness of just being human, with human flaw.
Exactly. That terrified rigidity, as you put it.
Yes. It feels like a symptom of a society that's lost its historical framework for dealing with mistakes, for processing imperfection. And when you lose that, you get what you're seeing: ideological fragmentation, extreme individualism. Everyone becomes their own moral judge, jury, and executioner.
Right, and there's no room for context, no room for growth or change. It becomes this absolute zero-sum demand for moral purity that no one can actually meet.
And that tension is the perfect starting point for this deep dive. Because today, we're exploring a system of governance, of societal cohesion, that seems to offer a completely contrasting model. It's one built explicitly on a pragmatic historical buffer, on a relentless, almost non-ideological focus on collective performance, and above all, stability. It's a system, in a way, designed to handle the flaws of individuals without letting them threaten the stability of the whole.
So our mission today is pretty ambitious. We're going to dive into the core philosophies that underpin the Chinese system. We want to look at how concepts like collective responsibility, performance legitimacy, and what some call radical pragmatism all work together to foster that stability and resilience.
Right. The goal is to understand how this emphasis on pragmatic problem solving offers a framework that's, well, just very different from nations struggling with that internal fragmentation you described at the dinner party. We're looking at how China's focus on collective responsibility fosters cohesion, and how that contrasts with the autoimmune challenges of extreme individualism we see elsewhere.
And how are we going to structure this? What's the plan?
We're going to look at it through three foundational lenses. First, the deep historical and philosophical roots that create this unique buffer of accountability. Then second, the pragmatic economic ideology that drove its modernization, the pursuit of prosperity.
Okay, history, then economics, and the third.
And finally, how all of this gets translated into a holistic governing strategy, both for managing things at home and for how it engages with the rest of the world.
All right, let's unpack this. If that rigid morality in the West has, as we said, devolved into something so unforgiving, we need to understand the absolute bedrock of legitimacy in the Chinese system. So how do they prioritize stability and performance over, say, the immutable God-given rights of a ruler?
To really get inside China's political psyche, you have to start with the single most important political concept in its history. It's dictated governance for something like 3 millennia. It's the mandate of heaven, or Tianmoni.
Tianmoi.
Right. It originates way back with the Zhou dynasty around the 11th century BC. And on the surface, it grants authority to the supreme ruler, who's often called the Son of Heaven.
Now, when you hear Son of Heaven in the West, your mind immediately goes to the divine right of kings.
Of course.
You know, the idea that a king is chosen by God, his rule is absolutely, he's basically untouchable. Is Tiananmen just the Chinese version of that?
That's the common comparison, but it's fundamentally different in its most crucial aspect.
Yeah.
The constraint. The Western divine right was, for the most part, unconditional. It was hereditary. It was your birthright.
Once you have it, you have it.
Pretty much. The mandate of heaven, however, was explicitly conditional. And this is the key. The ruler had to consistently prove their worth. And they proved it through just governance and, importantly, highly efficient performance.
So heaven might grant you the mandate, but you have to keep earning it. It's not a lifetime pass.
Exactly. It's a performance review from the cosmos. If a ruler became corrupt or incompetent or tyrannical, or if the state just failed to maintain order,
It's a social disorder, things like that.
widespread social disorder, massive internal uprisings, even severe natural disasters like floods or famines, all of those were interpreted as tangible signs. They were indicators that heaven had withdrawn its mandate. The universe itself was judging the performance of the governing class.
That's a fascinating built-in mechanism for accountability. It almost sounds like a cosmic self-correction. It means the system itself justifies its own overthrow if performance drops too low. That must have created just immense pressure on rulers to deliver.
Immense. The loss of the mandate didn't just justify rebellion. In many interpretations, it made rebellion a moral obligation.
A moral obligation to overthrow the government.
Yes, it fundamentally enforced this principle that the ruler only held a temporary, revocable duty to fulfill a mission. And that mission was delivering stability and prosperity. It was never an inherent, immutable right to rule forever. So this concept enshrined accountability, responsiveness, and performance right at the very heart of the political system from the beginning.
And this accountability, it's tied directly to the welfare of the people being governed, right? It's not just about keeping the bureaucracy running smoothly. It's about collective well-being.
Absolutely. This links directly to a foundational Confucian concept called Minben.
Minben.
It translates roughly to people-centered governance. The idea was articulated most powerfully by Mencius, who was maybe the most influential successor to Confucius. And he stated it very plainly. The people are the most important element, the country is next, and the ruler is the least important.
People first, ruler last. That is a radical reordering compared to a traditional Western monarchy, where the monarch's will is law.
It creates a completely different moral calculus. The core reason the government even exists is to serve the harmony and the welfare of the entire society. The ruler is just the mechanism for delivering that collective good. So the legitimacy of the state doesn't rest on abstract rights or some ancient legal code. It rests on its tangible ability to effectively deliver security and prosperity to the people.
That shifts the entire focus from an immutable right to rule to this constant, ongoing process of accountability and collective responsibility. It almost sounds like an institutionalized way of accepting human flaw. You don't demand a perfect ruler, but you absolutely demand results. And a failure to perform is grounds for removal.
That is the crucial distinction. And this historical pressure for performance connects directly to the modern mechanism for selecting leaders, which brings us to the whole concept of political meritocracy.
And this is where it gets really interesting for today, right? Because the structure for selecting leaders now seems to reflect that ancient pressure for both virtue and ability. The expectation isn't just that they can manage a spreadsheet, it's that they possess superior moral judgment.
Yes. The entire system, at least in its ideal form, is explicitly structured to select and promote leaders based on what they call superior ability and virtue. This idea runs like a continuous thread from Confucius, who believed the best and most virtuous should govern right through to the complex political structures you see today. It's a defense of political meritocracy. The idea that political power should be earned and distributed based on proven ability and high moral character.
I think a lot of people outside the system are skeptical of that claim. They often see the selection process as opaque or maybe just designed to elevate party loyalists. How does the structure actually try to enforce that meritocratic ideal in practice?
Well, the process is designed to be extraordinarily demanding.
Yeah.
It's explicitly multi-staged, ultra-competitive, and meant to filter for a very specific high-level skill set. It's a decades-long ascent. Oh, yes. Think about the career path. A prospective leader might start at a primary office level, a very local post. Then they might move up to a county-level position, then provincial. Eventually, after decades of this rigorous vetting and performance review, they might, potentially, reach the Politburo Standing Committee.
So we're not talking about a quick 4-year election cycle or getting appointed based on a short resume and good connections. This is a lifelong career path.
It is. And at every single one of those stages, from managing a rural town to leading a massive province like Guangdong, there are these rigorous, often quantitative evaluations.
What's the quantitative? What are they measuring?
They're specifically designed to test a whole range of political leadership skills. You have economic development metrics, of course, GDP growth, employment rates, but you also have social stability, performance, environmental environmental protection goals, anti-corruption effectiveness. It's a whole battery of performance reviews and competitive selections. And only the most skilled and, frankly, most dedicated can successfully navigate it all the way to the top.
So it's not just about selecting administrative experts who are good at management. The goal is to find people who are capable of exercising profound political power and complex judgment across this huge domain, from economics to ideology.
Precisely. And that's a key difference from many liberal democracies, where you often see a separation. You have experts in administration or the judiciary who are insulated from direct political power. They're accountable to elected leaders, and they operate in these very narrowly defined technical domains.
Right.
In the Chinese system, these meritocratically selected public servants are meant to exercise political power. They're meant to hold the ultimate authority. They're selected not just to identify administrative talent, but to find those who can make morally informed political judgments that benefit the collective good.
And the sources mention a specific structure for this meritocratic system. It's not just a top-down selection. It's described as a vertical integration that incorporates feedback and localized testing.
Yes, this vertical structure is absolutely key to its resilience and adaptability. You have political meritocracy operating at the top level, selecting the best possible leaders for the big strategic decisions. But this is supported by expensive and systematic experimentation that's carried out in the middle levels of government.
Can you give us an example of how that experimentation works? Because that sounds like a way of institutionalizing low-risk reform.
That's a perfect way to put it. Think of it like this. If the central government wants to try a massive new policy, say a complex environmental regulation or a pilot program for elderly care, they don't just roll it out nationwide immediately. That would be incredibly risky.
It could be a disaster.
It could. So instead, they designate specific cities or provinces as experimental zones. Think of Shenzhen in the 80s as a giant economic experiment. These middle levels test the policy, they assess the social and economic impact, they work out the kinks, and they report the findings back to the center. Only if the experiment proves successful and scalable does the central government then adopt it for nationwide implementation. This approach minimizes error, it ensures policies are actually pragmatic and based on evidence, and it provides real-world performance data on the leaders who are overseeing the experiment.
So it's also another layer of evaluation for the officials themselves.
Exactly. And what completes this vertical integration at the bottom?
What's the third piece?
That's where you have a form of democracy operating at the local grassroots level. This typically involves direct elections for village or neighborhood committees. And this local democracy is intended to ensure local consent and responsiveness to the immediate needs of the community. So the entire vertical structure is an attempt to reconcile meritocracy, having superior leaders make the big strategic decisions with democracy, meaning local consent and feedback from the ground up.
It sounds like an institutionalized approach to ensuring that governing is treated as a highly specialized, skilled profession, one that's constantly being checked by these performance expectations that are, in a way, inherited from the mandate of heaven. The system ensures stability by demanding capability.
That is the underpinning moral claim of the system. It sets a very clear standard for evaluating political leaders and for what counts as progress. The argument is that a society that doesn't have its best, most capable, and most upright people at the head of its leading institutions is fundamentally inefficient and ultimately unstable. This focus on maximizing the quality of rulers, backed by the intense pressure of performance legitimacy, is paramount.
Okay, so that's the foundation: accountability, performance, and the wisdom of the best leaders. Let's bring this philosophy into the modern era. How did this historical demand for performance drive China's modern economic miracle and, specifically, steer it away from the trap of what the sources call poor socialism?
The steering mechanism was really Deng Xiaoping theory. It emerged from this deep, visceral necessity for reform after periods of great instability. And this wasn't a rejection of the past. It was framed as an explicit, pragmatic adaptation of Marxism-Leninism, an evolution tailored specifically to China's unique socioeconomic conditions at the time.
And the primary driver for this massive shift seems to have been stability, a deep-seated reaction against the chaos of the Cultural Revolution.
Absolutely. Stability was the overriding need. And Deng was unequivocal about this. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, "In China, the overriding need is for stability. Without a stable environment, we can accomplish nothing and may even lose what we have gained." End quote. So for the entire reform process, Stability became the basic premise. It's the prerequisite for any growth, any progress. Without stability, the government cannot fulfill its modern mandate of heaven.
And this intense commitment to stability was paired with a really harsh practical critique of the previous ideological rigidities, the ones that had prioritized revolutionary purity over basic prosperity.
Yes. Deng explicitly criticized those he saw as ideologues who were seeking poor socialism or poor communism, or those who believed communism was just a spiritual thing, regardless of the economic outcomes for the people. He challenged this notion head-on. He argued that socialism cannot endure if it remains poor. If the Marxist system was truly superior, as it claimed to be, it had to demonstrate that superiority by achieving prosperity, by delivering a rising standard of living that was comparable to or even surpassed that of capitalism.
So the system's legitimacy became explicitly tied to observable, measurable economic output, to performance. A failure to deliver economic growth would mean a loss of the modern secular mandate.
That's it, exactly. The core task of the leadership became twofold. First, promote the modernization of the economy. This was encapsulated by the famous four modernizations: agriculture, industry, national defense, and science and technology. And second, to do this while preserving the ideological unity of the Communist Party, which was seen as essential to manage these difficult reforms without triggering another wave of instability. Economic production was key. Deng believed that, quote, only by constantly developing the productive forces can a country gradually become strong and prosperous.
This all sounds like a purely pragmatic overhaul driven by sheer necessity. Where does the philosophical flexibility, the radical pragmatism, come into play?
That flexibility is captured perfectly by the governing principle of seek truth from facts. This simple phrase guided all decision-making. It ensured that the priority was always practical results over rigid dogma. And the most renowned phrase that demonstrated this philosophical elasticity was, of course, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, a cat that can catch mice is a good cat.
The famous cat theory. It basically reduces ideology to an instrument of wealth creation. Whatever works, works.
It's the very essence of radical pragmatism. What that statement meant was that whether an economic approach involved a planned economy or a market-based structure, that was just a means of resource allocation. It could be functionally divorced from any political classification as long as it worked, as long as it caught mice. Given China's isolation and severe underdevelopment at the time, the pragmatic realization was that it had to borrow certain market elements. It had to borrow aspects of capitalism to modernize. But, and this is crucial, this adoption had to be managed and state-controlled to ensure it served the overarching socialist goal of collective prosperity, not just individual enrichment.
So how did this pragmatic flexibility actually manifest in the economic structure? It sounds like they developed a hybrid system designed to get that rapid growth while maintaining core political control, avoiding the destabilizing pitfalls of just, pure unguided capitalism.
They created what is very accurately termed a guided market economy. And this system was deliberately structured to try and avoid typical market failures, things like uncontrolled financial speculation or mass unemployment, while at the same time boosting international competitiveness. It's a system that ensures the state maintains the key levers of control so that it can direct the economy for the benefit of the country as a whole, rather than just for private profit.
How is that guidance structured? What are the specific mechanisms of control that allow the state to maintain its strategic direction?
The economy basically features two functionally differentiated but mutually supportive sectors, a state sector and a private sector. The state maintains public ownership over all the strategic central industries, land, banks, raw materials, major energy, and telecom companies. This isn't arbitrary. It ensures the state retains the fundamental ability to allocate resources for national benefit, for strategic long-term development like massive infrastructure projects, and for maintaining financial stability.
So the state holds the commanding heights, as you said before, the resources, the financial pipelines, the core infrastructure that allows it to steer the ship. What about the private sector?
The private sector is where things get really dynamic. Private ownership is not just allowed, it's heavily encouraged, but specifically in the finished goods and services industries. This is what creates the dynamism, the innovation, and the wealth necessary for that rapid growth. But there's a very interesting ideological distinction that allows them to square this circle with classical Marxist theory and maintain political legitimacy.
Okay, tell me more about that reframing. How do you allow for massive private wealth accumulation without creating an ideological contradiction?
Well, according to Deng's theory, the owners of private companies, which are known as civil-run enterprises, are explicitly not classified as the bourgeoisie. This is a kind of intellectual firewall, and it's based on a very strict interpretation of the Marxist definition. The bourgeoisie are those who own the means of production, which historically includes land and raw materials.
And in China, those crucial assets remain publicly owned, controlled by the state.
Exactly. So since private entrepreneurs don't own the land their factories are on, or the raw materials they use, they aren't technically the bourgeoisie. This intellectual move, this piece of ideological flexibility, allowed for the massive encouragement of private wealth and entrepreneurial activity without abandoning the core theoretical framework of the party. It's a masterclass in using ideology to serve pragmatic economic results.
That's a perfect encapsulation of radical pragmatism. The means, in this case, market mechanisms, are totally flexible, but the end goal, economic stability and national prosperity, is fixed.
And the legacy really speaks for itself. This synthesis is what resulted in the Chinese economic miracle. You had sustained high GDP growth rates, often over 8% annually, for 3 straight decades. This rapid ascent is what propelled China to become the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP. And the success of the system has fundamentally established that performance, measured in economic prosperity and stability, is the primary source of legitimacy in the modern era. It's an echo of the conditional nature of the mandate of heaven.
This economic pragmatism is clearly embedded in something deeper, a unique cultural logic, what the sources are calling holistic pragmatism. This suggests that decision-making isn't just about making money or hitting quarterly targets. It's about viewing everything through a long-term interconnected lens. This feels like the ultimate antidote to that short-sighted, rigid ideology we talked about at the very beginning. Let's dive into the core philosophical principles that guide this decision-making style.
Holistic pragmatism is fundamentally rooted in the deep philosophical tradition of holism. It's this way of viewing the universe and society as a dynamic whole of interconnected relationships. The Confucian concept of harmony of man, nature, and the world as one, or Tianran Heiyu, is absolutely central here. This dictates a requirement to evaluate the overall situation, to observe the deep developmental patterns over long periods, and only then formulate the most appropriate long-term strategy.
So any decision-making is always about the big picture and the long timeline, the 5-year plan, the 50-year plan, rather than just reacting to short-term, isolated events or, the next election cycle.
Precisely. This holistic view encourages what you might call strategic patience, and you see this thinking everywhere. In traditional Chinese medicine, for instance, the body is viewed as being in dynamic interaction with its environment. It's a comprehensive system where just treating an isolated symptom without understanding the whole is considered incomplete, even malpractice. Similarly, governance requires treating society as a complete interconnected system, which demands comprehensive long-term stability.
And what role does geography play in fostering this holistic, centralized worldview? It's something we often overlook, how the physical environment can shape a political culture over a millennia.
Geography is absolutely crucial to understanding the idea of the civilizational state.
Yeah.
China's distinct environment. You've got these natural blockades from the sea to the east, the vast deserts to the north and west, and the world's highest plateau to the southwest. All of this fostered a relatively stable and self-contained environment for millennia. These natural barriers limited external intrusions, which allowed for a very deep cultural integration and the development of a unified, highly centralized political system that has experienced remarkable continuity.
So in a sense, the geography insulated the civilization. It allowed this unified, holistic way of thinking to deepen and solidify without the constant external disruption you saw in, say, Europe, which was constantly fragmented by competing states and shifting borders.
Exactly. That continuity is why China is often referred to as a unique civilizational state. It's distinct from the modern nation-states of the West, which were often formed through these continuous cycles of war, peace treaties, and redrawn maps. This deep, continuous history makes the historical context less of an academic footnote and more of an ingrained operating instruction for the government.
Okay, so that's the holism part. Now, on the pragmatism side, how does that manifest in their philosophical practice? Is it just about being practical, or is there a philosophical basis for prioritizing action over pure contemplation?
The philosophy has historically stressed the importance of not just learning, but practicing teachings, of moving decisively beyond contemplation or intellectual purity. It's not enough to possess wisdom. You must apply that wisdom to government and to life. Confucius's dictum made this perfectly clear. If a man can recite 300 of the odes and yet when given a government post cannot fulfill it, what good is it to him? It stresses this necessary notion of practical application and measurable competence.
There it is again.
Performance is the ultimate measure of virtue.
And that performance is tied directly to societal welfare. Think of Guanxi's belief that people know propriety by having enough granaries and honor by having enough food and clothing. The philosophers emphasized that this people-centered governance, Minben, is critical. They taught that the way to achieve high moral behavior in a society is to first ensure their material needs are met. This means the philosophers stress the importance of practices that yield real-world results over contemplation alone.
So if holism provides the frame for this long-term strategic thinking, what are the specific Confucian values that guide state governance and foreign policy interactions today? This must inform their very patient, very deliberate diplomatic strategy.
These core values form the basis of what's often called the Confucian defensive moderate approach to international relations. It's a framework designed to be assertive in defending core interests while prioritizing global stability.
Okay, let's break down some of those key values, maybe starting with the preference for balance.
We begin with harmony, Anhe, and moderation, Zhongyun, which is also known as the doctrine of the mean. These principles encourage policies that favor stability, dialogue, and avoiding extremes or unnecessary confrontation. This cultural preference for nonviolence, for diplomatic mediation, for peaceful negotiation to settle disputes, it's all rooted in the belief that harmony is the desired state of nature and the ultimate source of stability.
And how do more abstract moral concepts like benevolence translate into global policy?
Well, benevolence, Ran, and righteousness, Yi, are used to support China's diplomatic narrative of peace, shared prosperity, and fairness in global governance. Ran, or benevolence, is central to the call for a community with a shared future for mankind. It's about promoting global cooperation based on mutual respect and benefit. Yi, or righteousness, supports China's push for fairness in global governance, such as advocating for the reform of international institutions to give developing nations a stronger voice. It's about ensuring justice and a fair deal in the global structure.
What about the cultural nuances that really shape how diplomacy is conducted on the ground? The concept of face seems critical in how they manage conflicts.
Face, Mianzi, plays an absolutely crucial role in external relations. Mianzi reflects national dignity and public standing. So when national dignity is challenged, or when perceived threats arise, say, concerning sovereignty or territorial integrity, Mianzi compels firm and assertive responses. However, and this is key, these responses are always very carefully calibrated to stop short of open escalation or military conflict. That preserves the overarching goal of stability and the long-term relationship. It's assertive defense, not unbridled aggression.
That explains the complex balancing act we often see in geopolitical friction, a very strong verbal defense paired with a lot of tactical restraint. Finally, let's touch on the grandest conceptual framework of all, Tianxia.
Tianxia. It literally means all under heaven. In modern foreign policy, this ancient worldview is reinterpreted. It's not a claim to empire, but a vision for an inclusive and cooperative global order. It emphasizes relational politics, cultural cohesion, and it underwrites major initiatives for global connectivity and partnership. It supports this notion of democratic international relations as a counter-narrative to a hierarchical world dominated by one power. Instead, it calls for equality among nations and a multipolar balance where different systems can coexist peacefully.
So this holistic, pragmatic structure allows for a very different model of society, one that fosters cohesion domestically. How does that work in practice?
It works through these interconnected networks and a proactive management of social order. It's all about ensuring the environment remains stable for continued development.
That sounds like a key distinction from the Western model, which you could describe as independent, competing civil societies all vying for resources and influence. How is the societal organization actually characterized?
The societal organization in China is characterized by communities and work unit networks that are organically connected. They overlap extensively with the network of the bureaucracy itself. This contrasts so sharply with the Western model, where you have independent, self-organized civil societies that are often in contention with the state for resources, operating through partisan politics. In China, this inherent cohesion is prioritized to maintain political and social stability, reinforcing the collective good over what they might see as fractured individualism.
And this emphasis on cohesion and stability domestically, it relies in part on actively managing information and promoting trust, which brings us to modern tools like the social credit system, the SCS.
Absolutely. The way the SCS is operated, and just as importantly, communicated, demonstrates this commitment to order. An analysis of state media reports on the SCS reveals that the coverage is almost entirely focused on its role in maintaining social order and fostering trust-building functions within society. It's framed as a necessary administrative response to systemic challenges.
What is the primary problem that the government says this massive system is designed to solve? What's the public rationale?
The rationale relies heavily on addressing these endemic public trust issues that really arose during the period of rapid, sometimes chaotic, modernization. Problems like contract breaches, product safety scandals, pollution, corruption. The system is presented as a crucial, necessary tool for promoting trustworthiness and law-abiding behavior to address these issues that erode social stability and undermine the collective welfare.
And what do the public surveys suggest about how this system is received, especially when you consider the sheer scale of the centralized monitoring involved?
It's interesting. Despite a lot of external criticism, the emphasis on social order maintenance has contributed to surprisingly high public support for the SCS. Some reports put it at nearly 80% support among citizens surveyed. And this support is particularly strong among citizens who experienced lower levels of social trust in their daily lives. They tend to view the system as an effective, if perhaps stringent, tool for maintaining social order and ensuring a basic level of fairness in business dealings and personal conduct.
So the core function, as it's perceived by much of the public, is less about ideological control and more about enforcing basic societal rules and norms that foster a stable, predictable environment.
That's precisely how the system's utility is framed and communicated to the public. For many citizens, the SCS promises to stabilize the foundational expectations of trust and compliance in an environment that was evolving so rapidly it sometimes felt chaotic. The media coverage overwhelmingly praises its trust-building and social order maintenance functions, which constantly reinforces that perception.
Okay, let's transition from the domestic to the global strategy. If the domestic system prioritizes systemic stability and collective welfare, how does that translate into the global arena, especially when they're managing that inevitable geopolitical friction?
It translates directly into that Confucian defensive moderate framework we talked about. This framework blends that cultural restraint, that Chungyong, or moderation, with strategic necessity, a form of defensive realism, and soft power. It allows China to assert its core interests while strategically and very deliberately avoiding outright conflict.
The Belt and Road Initiative seems like the ultimate expression of this holistic pragmatism on the world stage. It's a massive, long-term strategy that uses economic interdependence as a kind of stability mechanism.
It is a textbook example. The BRI emphasizes physical infrastructure, economic interdependence, and long-term cooperation across entire continents. This aligns perfectly with those Confucian ideals of, hey, harmony, and mutual benefit. It positions China as a benevolent and responsible power through economic attraction rather than through coercion or military threat. It's a strategy rooted in patience and gradual, lasting influence that aims to create shared developmental interests globally, which inherently reinforces stability for everyone involved.
And how does this defensive moderate approach guide the management of great power relations, especially with a country like the United States? The friction there can be incredibly intense.
The overarching goal is peaceful coexistence, which is rooted in the pragmatic necessity of shared global prosperity. China's approach towards the U.S. reflects a deep preference for strategic restraint and patience, even when relations are highly tense. We saw this very specifically during moments like the trade war from 2018 to 2020. The response has prioritized strategic restraint. They used limited counter-tariffs, and they worked very hard to maintain diplomatic dialogue, all to protect long-term economic stability and avoid an outright conflict escalation that would harm both countries and the entire global order.
It seems like they calibrate their responses so carefully. They want to assert their position without crossing a threshold that could lead to widespread instability.
Absolutely. The core tension they're always managing is asserting strength, which is Mianzi, while avoiding war, which is He. In disputed areas, for instance, the actions they take are often incremental, like using island construction to assert claims, but this is often balanced by diplomatic initiatives like participating in regional talks. It signals a preference for controlled engagement over open confrontation. This allows them to maintain stability while incrementally strengthening their position over the very long term.
What about relations with its regional neighbors, like India? The territorial disputes there are very acute and have led to actual clashes. Do the same rules of restraint apply?
The approach remains dual track. It is firm on sovereignty, as we've seen during the severe border disputes, which upholds the value of yi, righteousness, and national dignity, or Mianzi. But this firmness is almost immediately balanced by pragmatic diplomatic talks and long-term cooperation. The strategy prefers controlled disengagements and calibrated military postures, which reflects Zhongyong, the doctrine of the mean. They are assertive in defending their territorial claims, but they consistently pursue economic engagement and stability through multilateral platforms like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO.
So what is the ultimate strategic objective of this incredibly careful long-term engagement strategy? It sounds like they're working toward a fundamentally different kind of global order.
The big picture goal is to achieve a status of independence and equality on the global stage. China advocates for a replacement of the current, let's say, hierarchical world dominance model with a horizontal model of cooperation and benign competition. They believe they are fighting for a fair share of world wealth and influence. And their success, rooted in this pragmatic system, would lead to a refined world order where diverse governing models can coexist and influence one another based on proven performance rather than on rigid ideological alignment.
So this deep dive has really shown us how the Chinese system's unique approach, one that's rooted in the ancient conditional mandate of heaven, enforced by a political meritocracy across decades of trials, and guided by this holistic, pragmatic philosophy, is engineered fundamentally for stability and collective performance. This focus on long-term systemic health and the collective welfare provides such a clear, detailed contrast to the individualistic moral fragmentation that we observed at the start of our conversation. While one system seems to be straining under these self-inflicted ideological purity tests, the other relies on a sophisticated, patient framework for managing human imperfection in the pursuit of measurable results.
That contrast is the key takeaway. The endurance and consistency you see in the Chinese system, whether it's in its economic miracle or its measured diplomatic restraint, is rooted in this philosophical combination of holism and pragmatism. It allows decision-makers to utilize all sorts of diverse theories, whether they're economic policies or diplomatic strategies, as flexible means to achieve the singular long-term goal of national sovereignty, economic development, and sustained stability. The philosophical foundation remains fixed, but the tools they use are radically flexible. The success of this endeavor isn't just economic. It's a reflection of a profound cultural movement, a kind of Chinese Renaissance that's strengthening ideational independence and pointing toward a future where diverse governing models must coexist and learn from one another's proven successes in delivering stability and prosperity for their people.